Hello, I'm your host, Les Bubka. Welcome to Anxious Black Belt, a podcast that focuses on karate, mental health, and everything in between. If you enjoy our content and would like to support us, best way to do that is to listen to another episode, share with your friends, and leave us a review. All this stuff helps the mysterious algorithm to introduce our podcast to new audience. Thank you for joining me, and let's listen to the episode. Hello. Today my guest is Randall Davis. Did I pronounce that right? Because you got E in
Absolutely.
there. Is Randall or Randall?
Randall. Yeah.
Randall. Okay. From a conversation on conversation on Kung Fu.
Kung Fu Conversations.
I always get that confused. Same with conversation on karate. It's karate on Kung Fu.
Absolutely.
So my apologies for butchering that. That's a good start as always. I was listening to your a podcast with karate conversation on karate, and funny coincidence because in the same time as they approach you, I approach you. We didn't organize that. It was just like spontaneous. I suppose great minds think alike. Um, how was that being their guest? They are lovely
Uh,
people.
they're absolutely fantastic. It's funny because I had found them. There was another show a while back, also called Kung Fu Conversations, and it wound up being defunct. I felt kind of bad for them because they had one or two good interviews,
Mhm.
and then it went away. And I was going to see if I could reach out to them and talk to them. And so when I typed in conversations, this was almost 2.5, 3 years ago.
Mhm.
I found conversations on karate and I had recognized one of the names. I was on a gentleman's show, another great. It's funny how us podcasters that are like minded find each other. I was on a show called The Everyday Martial Artists
Mhm.
with Brian Doucette. And
Mhm.
I believe Greg was a guest on there. And I had listened to his episode and I loved it. And I had
Oh,
forgotten a
cool.
little bit about it. And then a couple weeks later, I was looking up for the other defunct Kung Fu Conversations, and I found Conversations on Karate. And I'm like, I like all martial arts. I don't
Mm.
just like, Kung Fu or Chinese martial arts. I like them all. So I'm like, let's see what they have to say. And it was an episode with Ken Knight.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I found all three of those lovely people at the same time. And then from then, I found you. So
Mm.
it's fascinating how we can kind of find each other in the world of podcasting. But I listen to Western boxers. I listen to a great podcast on Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, even though I don't do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. The I Suck at Jiu Jitsu podcast.
A
But yeah,
cool name.
yeah, it's a great show too. Josh McKinney is a talented young coach, but I love Sue and I love Greg and I like their message. I think
Mm.
they're very forward thinking and forward in their training, but they still can honor classical traditions. And that's kind of what Owen and I try to do in our own show is, we are Westerners, we are not Chinese, and we have 9 to 5 jobs. And but we study classical martial arts and we actually cross train. Owen does the 3 classical styles. He does Tai Chi, Xingyi, and Bagua. And Xingyi and Bagua are his main cup of tea. But he also does, Tai Chi. And my first root art is Wing Chun, which I still practice and teach. And then I found Owen almost 11 years ago with the Xingyi, which I love. I absolutely love Xingyi. And then the last couple of years, I've sort of kind of played with the Bagua. It's very complicated in connecting the mind and the body as far as where am I moving dynamically in space. It's a very fascinating art, Les, because it's not just moving on a forward and backward plane, right? It's not just forward and backwards, but it's also rotating around itself.
Mhm.
And so the body complexity is very advanced. And so I have to put the nervous system of a bus driver into the dynamic sphere of circle walking. So it's been a challenge, but I love it. I love a challenge, and I like things that challenge me and try to make me grow as a human being and as a person and as a practitioner, you know.
Mm. I was wondering, you said something that sparked my interest in relation to Kung Fu. I'm not a specialist on Kung Fu. I've got few friends who doing a praying mantis.
Oh, very good.
Doing,
Do you
well,
know do you know if it's do you know if it's northern or southern? Not a maybe
it's,
seven
it's
star.
it's from Poland, so it's Eastern.
Okay. Very well, okay, very good, very good, very good. Yes, very good.
But what I was gonna ask you, is it in Chinese martial arts that the Westerners try to be more Chinese than Chinese? Because in Japanese martial arts, it's the Europeans and Americans are more Japanese than Japanese people all the way in.
We do have that. You'll find a lot of, I don't want to say all charlatans, but I
Mm,
think I think some of the appeal is something that is very non-modern and non-Western. You know, we live in a world right now. I'm talking to you through my cell phone,
yeah.
and um, and it's a very nice cell phone too. As a matter, it's an old one now too. It's outdated. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Google and their Pixels.
Hmm.
So this is a Pixel 6 Pro, and I'm going to get an 8 here in the next few months. But you know, our Western culture is disposable.
Hmm.
It's quick. It's high rev. It's fast paced. My job is in the fast lane, and no pun intended. I drive a city bus during the rush hour times in a thriving metropolis. So we're very fast paced, and I think something that appeals maybe to the Chinese martial arts is you have these concepts that integrate Eastern philosophy, which is a little bit slower paced, a little bit of a cool down to the nervous system, a little bit of a cool down to the mindset. You know, everything, you know, not everything, but a lot of it is based and interwoven on nature. And so those concepts are very contradictory, and it's old. It's an old culture, right? So you've got stuff, and some of it's not all correct with the dates.
Yeah,
History is
yeah.
a little bit different in the East than it is here in the West. We like cold, hard dates. At this time, this person was doing one thing, which we can only speculate, even in the West, on history. But you know, the Eastern philosophies and the Eastern, you know, that it's very ancient, and something that I think sometimes is a problem is things that can move these arts forward as far as how we train them and how we understand them are being held back because they want it to be classical. They
Mhm.
want it to be traditional, you know, and we can't go into a time machine and go back 450 years and say, look, they're training the form exactly the same way. You know, it's the exact same way. But you know, something I'm going to kind of go on a limb here. You got me thinking about something now, Les, is would you want to go back in time 100 years and buy a car from 100 years ago? Now, maybe if you could transport it till now, and if it was in pristine condition, you know, you could sell it as a classic, but you
Mhm.
wouldn't want to drive it on the interstate right now, would you?
No, not really.
No, not at all. It's not going to go to the proper speeds. You know, all these other things. It's not going to have the shocks and struts for the road system now. So I think the understanding of these martial arts, these classical martial arts, if we start to understand a little bit about where they came from more, then maybe, you know, and what time period, you know, it's when I train Wing Chun, it's not 1950s, you know, it's not 1950s Hong Kong.
Hmm.
You know, it's 2024 here in Denver or in Boulder, Colorado, you know. So I try to keep that mindset also modern too. I don't know. I don't know if that any
It's
of that made any sense, Les.
it does, it does, it does. Um, in karate is kind of the same transition. I'm wondering if it's the same transition like in Chinese martial arts, because we had that episode that the original traditional, because we got two traditional
Yep.
karate, right? The traditional
Mm-hmm.
traditional karate and modern traditional karate, who likes to call
Yep.
itself traditional.
Yeah. Yeah.
So pre-modern traditional, all the masters was cooperating, exchanging and stuff. And suddenly there was a shift. We must preserve the culture. You must be
Yep.
doing like my teacher said, and there's no
Mhm.
change. Is the same process hitting the kung fu, or is it more open or more closed, or well, how does that look like?
It's a strange landscape, and I want to tell you, I think one of the big reasons it's so
Sorry.
strange. No, you're good. Is the kung fu styles are so different. I mean, they are so different. Yes, it's all from China, but it's a funny thing, and I'll send you links after we do our show.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the first form in Wing Chun, if you look at the first form in Xingyi, and if you look at the first form in Bagua, you would think they were all from a different planet,
Mm.
let alone the same country. So it looks, where I was mentioning, if you do a Goju form, you do a Wado Ryu form, you do a Weichi Ryu form, and you do a Shotokan form,
Mm-hmm.
they're all going to be very different, but you can all tell that they're karate.
Yeah.
If you do a Wing Chun form and you do a Tam Tui form, if you do a Baji form and you do a Xingyi form, you might not think they're from the same planet.
Mm.
And so I believe that the difference of the systems has brought along different problems, maybe so to say. You're talking about the traditional versus, the classicalists versus the modernists. And I think China has a lot to do with that, the country themselves. They're very much pushing wushu,
Mm-hmm.
which wushu to me is nothing but a gymnastics routine. It's the kata or the talu or the forms are based upon traditional Chinese martial arts, but the martial arts has been stripped away from them completely. As a matter of fact, they call it generations of wushu.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the 60s and 70s in China, and even in the early 80s and the late 70s, when some Westerners were allowed to come over and train in the government formed, and I want to say that government formed wushu,
Mm-hmm.
they would bring in some of the old masters to teach the warm-ups specific to those systems, the stretching routines specific to those systems. Maybe you're doing a Fanza routine, right? Which is big windmills, whipping arms, the legs are long, and they have warm-up sets and they have power training methods that are specific to that system, less. And so this student would learn that, and then they would learn the form, and they might add in a jump kick, they might add in a spin kick here to make it look good.
Mm-hmm.
But the power output that they were doing was correct. Even though they weren't using it for combat, it looked visually correct because
Mm-hmm.
it was the same power systems that system used. Now it's all Western athletics, and then they just train a kata.
Mm-hmm.
And so each of those systems, Les, if I did a Baji form and I was doing it for Wushu, which sounds crazy because Baji is very, very bare bones, very big system.
Mm-hmm.
But if I did it and I only did push ups, sit ups, calisthenics, and then I did the form, the power output wouldn't look right
Mm-hmm.
because there is a kinetic chain that each of those systems produce force and learn how to deal with force personally, right? So how Baji deals with force is different than how Wing Chun deals with force. How it outputs force for its strikes, which is whole body, is different than how Wing Chun does it, which is very isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's just gymnastics. So that's the modern stuff. So they've got wushu. What else do they have? They have the government sponsored Chen Village Tai Chi, right? Is it good? I think it's okay. But is it as good as what I think the guys in Beijing are doing? No, maybe not so much.
I
It's
think that
government sponsored. Yeah.
looking from the outside and not from the kind of not relation to kung fu,
Hmm.
it looks like the Chinese government is pulling both ways. So they try to preserve the traditional martial arts and sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. Um, we've got those people from China who I can't remember the fighter's name who's taking and punching the Tai Chi masters and knocking them
Yep.
out. being punished for that because he's disrespecting the image of Tai Chi and traditional martial arts. But then they funding so much in Sanshou and Wushu that is kind of very big disparity between those two
Yeah, it
things.
is.
It's
It
like,
is very much so.
let's do this. Let's do, oh no, let's do this now. Oh no, let's do this now. It's like kind of a madness a little bit, but it's each
I
the way.
I think a lot of it less too is they're trying to show the ethics and the morals of Chinese culture in these arts. And so they're so focused on that they want to strip away the combative side of things. We
Okay.
joke, a lot of I guess we are. I guess maybe some of us are traditionalists even though we're not Chinese. A lot of what's going on at Shaolin Temple right now and Mount Wudong is more how would you say it, performers and athletes dressed like monks,
Hmm.
but it gives the illusion of traditionalism, or the illusion of being training in the Chinese mountains. The tourists pay for it. It's a moneymaker. And so
But
what drives Shaolin Temple, what drives the Wudong, what drives, I mean, they may say, hey, we're trying to preserve this culture, but this is the same culture that in the Mao regime went around burning down these temples and killing all these
mm,
people. So it's a weird thing to look at from a Western perspective.
yeah,
But
funny enough, you were saying about the Shaolin Temple and stuff. My wife is half Thai, so she was living in Thailand for about half a year or so, and she was training. She does kung fu as well. She was training with the Shaolin master there, and he was just complaining about all the show and how it's changed and it's not as it used to be. So yeah, it's
it
interesting how the money drives change, isn't it?
oh, it, sometimes for the good, but mostly for the bad. And then the Southern arts too. We're talking about traditional and things like that. The Southern arts are very distinct from the Northern arts. You hear the old catchphrase, which is thrown around a little too much. I disagree with it now. But, they talk about Southern fists and Northern legs. Like the Southern arts don't kick at
Mm.
all. But I do know that the Southern arts, a lot of it is very, how do I say this? It rushes to combat based.
Hmm.
You could take, maybe 15 to 20 really good lessons, and you might have some kind of semblance of what looks like a martial efficacy. You might understand, put your hands up, how to deliver a proper strike, how to deliver a proper kick, things like that. And then in the Northern arts, it's going to take more time. It doesn't mean that it won't be as effective as the Southern
Hmm.
arts, maybe somewhat more so, but they're going to spend more time. It's not that they're going to spend more time in a horse stance, but they might have variations of what make up a stance. You know what I mean? They might have other training drills to train your stance, if that makes sense. They
Hmm.
might have a footwork that is a variation of a fixed stance, or they might have a fixed stance that is a variation of the footwork, and vice versa. So there's a link to them. So you might learn 5 or 6 things that deal with the lower body. And then you
Hmm.
might learn 5 or 6 things that helps you move the trunk or the core of the body from shoulders to hips.
Hmm.
And then there would be a method less of how to connect the torso to the lower body. And then there would be a method to integrate the arms into the torso. And
Hmm.
then there'd be a method to combine all three to make one solid thing that's doing 10 things at once, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it would be, instead of looking at something like, if it's one thing, maybe it's a block of wood. But if you look at a watch, you're only looking at 3 hands on the watch, correct? But let's
Yeah.
say you're lucky enough to have a Rolex and you take off the lid and you take off the arms and you look underneath, and there are 37 to 40 different things making those 3 arms move. That's what a lot of the Northern and a lot of the internal arts, if you will, like Tai Chi, Xingyi, Bagua, Tongbei. I classify all of those in an internal perspective, but they will focus on the 37 things And then once you have years of training the 37 things, then you will look at the 3 arms, which might be grabbing, joint lock, strike, throw, kicking, those kind of specific things.
In terms of a kind of northern and southern, it's kind of, I think people don't realize, because we've got that in karate, people saying, oh, this is a shuri, this is a naha. But for karate, it's that village next door that you're going over the street and you're in Naha and saying, oh, this building, like they fighting like this because they're living there and there. But if you take the size of China, it
Oh
is
my
like
gosh.
it's nearly on the other side of the world. Do you
That's
think
right.
that those changes are dictated, as the legend says, because of a different of the environment? So this got the rice pots and they have to go, longer stances to be balanced, or is it just the personal preferences of people living there and cultural impact on that significant difference in appearance of the martial art there?
I think it's all of it. I think it's all of it. It's you're right. China is absolutely positively enormous.
Mm.
I'll give you an example of what you're talking about with the culture, with the pots and things like that. There's a gentleman that we're going to have on our show named Lavelle Marshall.
Mm-hmm.
Lavelle lives in Mongolia, and he does Mongolian bulk, which is a jacketed wrestling, a little bit like
Oh, yeah,
judo or
yeah.
short, but the jackets are totally different. There's much more of the human body exposed, and they're hard leather,
Mm-hmm.
and it's crazy because their throws are very unique,
And they've
and
they've
all
got
their
the colorful tassels, isn't it? That's the ones.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. But all the throws are setups on how they corral, they brand, they neuter, and they take care
yeah.
of their livestock. So yeah, I mean, yes, a part of your everyday life was a part of how you trained, and how you would find the time. There's legends about Ching Ting Hua, who was a famous Bagua practitioner, who was a famous grappler. They called him Eyeglasses Ching because that's what he was. He would make glasses, right? And apparently he would do a lot of his work in like a horse stance, so he's always getting training. So I really do think, it's how to incorporate things. Was there preference involved with people and how they came up with things? Absolutely. Would they use the natural environment as, maybe, hey, look, there's a mantis fighting a bird? I don't know about that stuff. I don't know. I think that's more legend and fantasy. But I mean, we get inspiration from nature every day. I was talking
Mm.
to one of the kids at CU, and he's a engineer of some kind, and he was talking about designing a new roof tile that was similar to how a leaf is fashioned, and you
Mhm.
stack them. It's a little bit like tile, and it's to collect water and things like that. So I do believe that even in modern day, we can be inspired by nature, but I don't necessarily know if it creates an entire martial art. But then again, too, I'll give you an example. Maybe one hand can create a concept or an idea for a system. You've heard of a little system called Jeet Kune Do.
Yep. Yep.
So, so Bruce Lee, Jeet Kune Do, way of the intercepting fist. So I use in my Wing Chun that I was taught a hand called Jeet Sao, but it's Cantonese and it has multiple
Mm.
meanings, correct? So we don't use interception, we use slicing. Okay, so the Jeet Sao would come from what we refer to as the subcenters, like shoulders and hips, and then it would go to the center line less. So it wouldn't be a punch directly from the center line; it would come across the
Okay, I
center
see.
and cut the angle. And so what that does is two lines can't live on the same plane at the same time. So one of them is going to diverge, right? So it's going to cut across that vector. And not only is it coming in at an angle, when it makes contact less, it's pressing downwards also. So it's
Mhm.
forward and down, forward and down. So I'm slicing across their hit. But Bruce Lee took one concept and principle from Wing Chun and he started applying it to other things that were not Wing Chun. And then from there, he started noticing pattern and how to break it and things like that. And that's when he came up with other concepts and other ideas to create Jeet Kune Do. But he only used one or two principles. Well, he used a lot more than that for Wing Chun, but at least in the naming process, so, one or two things can create a whole system and a whole method. That being said, with these systems in China, I don't think the systems had like, some of them like Hunga that could have like 75 forms. It's got like 30 or 40 different weapons and things like that. I think that was added and accumulated over time. A lot of these were much smaller, especially in the Southern arts. A lot of those systems started as 3 or 4 forms, and that was it, less. And then, permutations, or maybe it's peaceful times. We talk about the teacher's rice bowl, right? And if you only have 4 forms, well, then in 5 or 6 years, your students are gone. So you can't fill your rice bowl. So maybe you take permutations and add this a little bit from here, a little bit from there. And then your 4 or 5 forms go to 15. And then the student keeps coming through the door.
Yeah, I think as well it is because we've got the same in karate. There's some systems that got, 140 kata. I think the people by nature, some are hoarders. More is better.
Sure. Yeah.
And they just collect another from another from. I know because I am a kind of a forever student, so I just enjoy doing courses and collecting the certification. I never using them, but that's interesting. I go for it. So I think that plays a role as well. Like, I like this one. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna put it in my system. I'm gonna take this. I'm gonna take that, and then you know as well, people starting to. Some people got a huge interest in preserving the system. So as much as
Absolutely.
they collect and keep it
Yeah.
alive, then at least somebody later is gonna have it and choose some
That
stuff from it.
and God bless the lineage holders that do that.
Mm,
I might be in a position to do that. I'm not sure if I want to do that though.
mm,
I like cross training, and I think cross training happened a lot. It didn't matter if it was ancient China, Japan, Indonesia. Currently, in our modern day, I mean, we can cross train now because of technology better than anything. Is it necessarily good? I don't know. It's up to that person. It might not be martially good, but sometimes cross training in another art might just be for fun. It might
mm,
be for flexibility. It might be for curiosity. And so I think the other thing too is, especially in the modern day, we have to realize that people are going to train for different things, and different wants and different reasons. So I think that's a part of it too. It's funny you're talking about forms. Something that I made Susie giggle with, and I love this. Did I don't know? Maybe you know this answer from listening to the episode, but if you don't, I'll ask you again. Do you remember how many moves are in the Shingi first form?
you said it's one or three or something like that. Some very little
3.
three. Yeah,
Yeah. So I
yeah.
do the 3. I do and the hands and the feet are integrated. So I do 3 moves on one side, and then it brings my right side forward. And I do those same 3 moves on the other, and it brings my left side forward. And so I could go to if there was a road to the moon, I could, hold my breath in space or whatever. I could go to the moon, and then there's each form has a turn to turn you 180 degrees around. And then I could come back and I could do one form, And
It's
so
funny.
go ahead.
It's funny because if you look on the kata, especially the Shotokan katas, you've got pretty much similar principles. So you're going shuto, 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 right?
Mm-hmm,
Free, change, change, change. So you've got that
mm-hmm,
3 options because it's only 3 ways that you can move around your opponent, right?
mm-hmm.
So I think
Yeah,
that's all kind of come from one concept somewhere down the line and just being diluted and going in different, getting its own life.
very much so. Very much so. 3 is a kind of a sacred number,
Mm,
and so you'll see that quite a bit. As a matter of fact, with the Wing Chun forms, some of the more important hands that are trying to show you a principle will be repeated, 3 different times in the form, like, the 3 prayers
yep.
to the Buddha, or, in the second form, you see a lot of bong sao, 1, 2, 3. You do it one way, 1, 2, 3. You do it the other way. So anytime 3 is seen in Wing Chun, it's very important. And it could be for transition, it could be for tactic, it could be where are you moving, it could be where are they moving. So anytime I see that numeric of 3, I'm always like, okay, well, that's important, at least in Wing Chun. Why am I doing this? What's going on? So yeah, it can be a mental cue for how you look at the formula of the form, right? Because the forms should have formula in them, right? Form without function is meaningless, as my Sifu and Wing Chun says. So I really believe that, you can move around and be very strong, but if you have no tactics with that strengthless, you could have these beautiful cannons that could knock down buildings from afar, but if they're aimed at the wrong target, what good are they? So the tactic has to be a part of it, the strategy, the thinking, those kind of things. And I always call it, you have to have, I have a whiteboard in my kitchen, and we do a lot of, when I do like little seminars at home, we'll do like little whiteboard. You have to have whiteboard time, but then you have to have the sweat time, because the sweat time is how you take the tactic on the wall and integrate it into the body.
Sure. Oh, sorry, bloody cough.
You're all right.
I've seen that in Chinese martial arts now, at least on YouTube's and stuff like that, you getting a crave for looking for applications to the forms as well as in karate. We've got a huge boom on finding the traditional applications, grappling and stuff like that. And I think in karate, this is not kind of based on any research. It's my
Sure.
interpretation what's happening. So don't take any scientific approach to it. Um, but I see that people looking for a grappling. For me, kata is mostly grappling because I've been doing wrestling. So those moves translate to me making more sense being a wrestling and grappling than striking, right? But I think people forgetting in Okinawa at the time when the karate was taught, everybody was doing wrestling in school, in primary schools. And in Europe, if you look, I was talking with Jamie Clapp. If you're not familiar with the camera,
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm
I
very
recommend it.
big fan of.
Yeah, in Europe as well, most of the kids would wrestle just for fun
Mhm.
because there was nothing else to do. Do you think that that basic wrestling been as well incorporated in Chinese martial arts and then it been forgotten and now we're getting a renaissance of it, so trying to find it?
Again, I can't say yes as an overall, because the
Hmm.
systems are so different, right? Maybe in the northern styles, they're finding it, like a lot of the long fist stuff and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. A lot of that is a setup for joint lock, throw, disarming, those kind of things. But in the South, it was always there. Even in
Uh-huh.
the striking arts, we do a lot of, the sticky hands
Yeah,
and
yeah.
chisao, right? Well, what is that? It's basically the grappler's awareness,
Mm-hmm.
which is tactile, right? But it's a setup for a strike,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I don't know. I that one is such a tricky one for me. I think a lot of the Southern arts already incorporated throws, are already incorporated strikes. So I don't think it was separated. Now Wing Chun is, at least the way I was taught, is pretty much a short range striking style or short range boxing.
Uh-huh.
And then we're talking about how things were created. That went through different phases. But one of the big influence phases that a lot of it was done on these small alleyways, these narrow alleys that you couldn't get a powerful reverse punch, you couldn't get a high kickoff. So everything started to narrow, and they were trying to see where could we produce the most force out of the least distance possible. But yeah, I mean, the shingi that I do, you remember The Sound of Music and her song
Yeah.
Do a Deer, and the kids sing it.
Mm.
Well, we have something in the Chinese arts called Shui Na Ti Da, right? And Shui is your throw, Na is the lock and how you lock somebody's arm. Da is your strike, Ti is a kick, Shui Na Ti Da, right? So a lot of like Xingyi, those three moves I was telling you about. In those three moves in Pichuan, I have something that is a hand method. I have something that is a kicking method. I have something that is a locking method. I have something that is a throwing method. I actually have an elbow method too, as well as a knee. And so in three movements, looking at the whole body, you will have tons and tons and tons of application. Let me give you an example, Les. So you're talking about, the throwing and things like that. And I'm mentioning, the Xingyi, the Bagua should have all of it. Well, at least the Xingyi that I've been taught through Owen, my co-host, is very specific. We have a way of looking at things. Let me explain to you. To us, Xingyi is a power method. It is a power method first. And once you have that power method in your body and ingrained in your body, I could do something that looks like maybe a Taekwondo application. But if I have the power method of Xingyi, then to me, it would be Xingyi. Or let me give you a different example, Les. Let's say that I showed you an entry method that somebody was like, oh, this is an entry method from Xingyi, right? And so you do it and you're like, look, I'm doing Xingyi. If I saw it, I would say no. And someone would be like, why? Like, because you don't have the power. It is the power that is the Xingyi. It is not, this is an application. And so for me, at least when I look at things, if you don't have the power method, it goes back to the wushu. Remember I was talking about the wushu at the beginning, right? Even if it is a floor routine in gymnastics, if you're training in modern, calisthenics and, doing your weightlifting and stuff like that, and then you do a kung fu form that's maybe from Tongbei, that's not going to be Tongbei for me because you didn't have the power training method, because Tongbei has a specific way to produce power. Baji has a specific way to produce power. And those to me, application is the cherry on top. It's not that application is not the least important thing, but I think that spontaneity has to be too, right? So how do we train that spontaneity? Well, first you have to be strong and capable inside of the method, and then you can produce the application. Like in Wing Chun, I have this hand right here. I've got a little 45-degree thing here. Well, I have the front of the arm. That has an application with 2 or 3 different methods of applying it. I have the thumb side. I can pull with that. I haven't changed the shape. I've just changed the direction, right? I have the fingers, which can be a threat. I'm probably not going to poke anybody in the eye with those, right? I have the inside, which is the pinky line. That has a different application than the back half of the arm, right? If something is overcoming me and coming in on this angle here, I can straighten out the elbow, right? And disperse it that way. So there's another thing. I can come in with the chomp. And so what is there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways to use one hand. So that's a different way of thinking about it. I have one hand, I can use 5 ways. You have 5 different applications to deal with one thing. And if you start thinking about it that way, I have a better relationship with this one hand than you do those 5 things. Because it's less, and I train this more, right? And then all I have to do to get another hand is this, and that should have 5 applications. And then all I have to do to get another hand is this. Well, that should have 5 applications. And then all of them have a link to each other because the elbow is in the same position. So that means that each of these 5, each of this 5, and each of this 5 have a link to each other. And so it becomes a multiplier. And so that's kind of how I have 5 or 6 different things that I can use 200 or 300 different ways. So I think for application, at least to me, that's a much better method. That would be a Wing Chun mindset. If I'm doing Xingyi, if you can do a 1, 2, 3 pattern, but you don't have the whole body behind it, meaning that the footwork and the body should be moving together, integrated as a whole, then you're not doing Xingyi. It's not a Xingyi application. It is the, I don't want to say external, but it's kind of a concept of an application. But the application is the power. Owen and I have actually talked about this on our podcast, Les. Some of the Xingyi applications would be absolutely useless if you didn't have the correct body structure and power method behind them. So I don't know. I think maybe it's a different lens to look at things.
So
what it's worth.
I experienced the different way of generating power from the internal martial art. I don't know if you're aware of Jikwan or Aikiken.
Yeah. Is
Right.
it? I think that's an offshoot of Ichon. I think that's an
Yeah,
offshoot of Ichon.
I might be pronouncing it wrong, but they're using a lot of very short dynamic
Mm-hmm.
movements generated
Mm-hmm.
from like within the core. And one of the leader renowned teachers is in Poland, so I had his books and practice with his students. It's very different feel and very rapid power. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think so. People realize how dynamic people can be from the very, very short distance and how much power they can generate. And to connection to my karate, the Taiki Ken is from Seiwa. I think it was his surname was Seiwa, but he was a friend of Kyokushin Masoyama, so they incorporated that into the Kyokushin training. So we've got the Iken or Taiki Ken in the training. So it's that all that
That's great.
very
That's great.
rapid pulls and rapid moves and pushes away. So so that's kind
Uh,
of my, because I remember you've been talking about with Sue and Greg about the internal arts being kind of a breeding ground for a charlatans
Charlotte,
and so yeah.
it's very bad.
But
Yeah, there
there
are
are
good
people,
teachers out there.
yeah. So it kind of internal art with the internal art not they are not equal, if that
You
makes
know,
sense.
absolutely it's interesting because I want to tell you something funny. So this was my first few months when I decided that Shingi was for me,
Hmm.
and Owen was going to be one of my new teachers. I'm like, okay, I really like this because they've got a hand. So in my lineage of Wing Chun, we have hands that are similar to the four main strikes in Western boxing. Some will
Hmm.
say five, but we do the four. Okay, you've got a jab, a cross, a hook, and an uppercut, right?
Hmm.
So we have a jab that comes from the center. Our cross would be the jeet that I showed you, sub
Hmm.
center to center. We've got a hook, which is kind of weird. It's this one here. And then we have an
Well,
uppercut.
mm. Yeah, so we're using this one as well. That's our long range hook.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's
the
awesome.
thumb
That's
down.
a
Yeah.
very good. You can pull with that. It's a very good pulling
Mm.
hand, right?
Yeah.
Get somebody's head in here, set them up for throw. So Xing Yi has very similar hands. They have a jab, which is their Bung Chuan. They
Hmm.
have a cross, which is their Pao Chuan. They also have a cross, which is Hung Chuan. You know, they've got the uppercut, which is Sun, which is
Hmm.
water. It comes out as a piercing palm, and then it comes up. And then their hook would be horse.
Hmm.
And there's different variations of this horse hand. And so I'm like, oh, well, they got a jab, they got a cross, they got a hook, they got an uppercut. I'm like, oh, it's just going to be so easy to integrate these systems, right? And then I sparred with Owen for the first time. And I'm a short, little chubby guy. I'm about 230 and 5'5". I'm not very tall. Owen's about 6'1", 6'2", and maybe 180.
Hmm.
And here's a big difference for me between internal and external. So Wing Chun, I like to show things, okay? So this would be Wing Chun's power.
Uh-huh. He's flashing the lights for those
Yeah,
who.
very rapidly, very
Yeah.
rapidly. So it's on and off, on and off, on and off, to the point where you can't recognize it,
Mm.
right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I might come with a solid structure, and then I'll relax less, and then I might pull, and then I'll
Mm.
continue my chains of hitting. So I
Mm.
want to go so fast and feel for openings that you have no place to enter.
Mhm.
With Xing Yi, the power is constant.
Mm.
And so it doesn't matter if I'm moving up, down, side to side, the power is constant.
Mhm.
And so that for me was hard to read because I couldn't read him. And so he would always be on. And the power output wouldn't be 100%,
Mhm.
right? It would be maybe 20% output. but it would be 20% of his left ankle, 20% of his right ankle, 20% of his left knee, 20% of the right knee, 20% of the left hip, right hip. And if you go up, and then all of a sudden those 20% add up to, I think, what is it, like 180%, right? Something like
I'm not
that,
very
something
good at
ridiculous.
math.
Yeah, I'm not very good at math either. But anyway, because he is integrated so well, it felt like I was fighting 5 people. It felt like I was trying. It felt like maybe a good way to explain it would be like trying to grapple a tractor. It doesn't matter what part of it you grab, that tractor is going to go up the hill. That tractor is going to turn the corner. It doesn't matter what I do because he's so integrated with his own movement that he doesn't know that I'm there. He was just tossing me around, punching me, kicking me, whatever. And I was moving up, down, for a little chubby guy, I can move pretty well. And there was nothing I could do. And so I'm like, there's something here. It's not magic, but it is a way of training that I'm not familiar with. And so that's, to me, was, the internal thing is where, a lot of the external arts, it might be full relaxation to full tension, or it might be a partial body relaxation to tension. The internal arts, they can do that on all the time, or they also have access to partial body. Maybe I just want to move this arm. Maybe I just want to move this wrist. Maybe I just want to move the elbow joint, Maybe I just want to move the shoulder joint. Whatever it may be, they have access to the pieces and the whole. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
cool.
And I think something that's good about that is a lot of those practices have good ways to move the joints in places that we normally don't move them. A lot of us are sitting all day. I sit under heavy stress. I am in traffic. There's cars everywhere. And so there's a lot of tension. And so when I get to move my joints and when I get to move my body in ranges of motion that I'm not normally doing every day, that helps not only decrease some of the tension in my body, but it's good for your joints. And it helps kind of reset your nervous system to get ready for another day of Western driving in heavy traffic. So
I think people don't realize how driving a bus is stressful. I've got a friend who drives bus in London, and the amount of abuse and stress and road rage he gets in is unbelievable. You have to be very tough to do that job.
Yeah, it's when I was a kid growing up, there was an American commercial popular in the 80s, and it was just when DuPont Teflon had come out with the nonstick frying pan, and they could fry an egg and it would slide off without any butter or oil. Well, you have to have that for bullshit when you're driving. You can't let it stick to you. And then you talk a lot about tension in the nervous system on your podcast, Les. If I have 10 to 15 cars cut me off a day, and that's lowballing it. That's a low number. If I'm still thinking about the first car who cut me off that day, I'm carrying that tension around in my body.
Yeah.
And when I carry that tension around in my body, that means that I am not physically giving the act of driving the proper attention that it needs. I'm still stuck in the memory. I'm still emotionally holding on to my anger of something that happened 2 hours ago. And now I have somebody else cut me off. And do I add that on? Do I continually
building up?
That you just start building up? But if I can take a couple breaths, if I can let it out, not screaming, not honking my horn, not yelling at a customer, but just not taking it personal and let it slide on, then I can reboot my nervous system quickly because there's going to be tons more stimulus coming at me. You will be overwhelmed with stimulus if you hold on to anger and tension while you're driving. And I think that, go ahead. Yeah.
Do you think that martial arts help you with that control and
100%.
jumping into it? How do you think that Kung Fu is impacting your mental health? Was that a help, a drain on your mental health, or how that impact you?
I think I had to shift my mindset on how I was training.
Mm-hmm.
When I start, I'll be 45 in September, and when I started Wing Chun, I was 19 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and I was a young teenage boy, and it was a good striking art. And I just come off of years of high school wrestling. I was also doing judo in
Mm-hmm.
college the time I was doing Wing Chun, so I had a good grappling art. I had a good striking art, and I'm like, oh, this is it. I paid way more attention to Wing Chun and judo than I ever did my English literature degree.
Very
so
similar, very similar.
so when I was 18, 19, 20, I needed the rough and tumble.
Mm,
But something that I learned in those formative years, those 3 years of Wing Chun, if I'm angry or if I have tension and I try to apply Wing Chun, it doesn't work.
mm,
Because if I have tension, I won't be fast enough to bring up the next move. Right.
mm,
But if I'm relaxed physically, then I can come up with, the next moves and be there on time. What I've had to learn in my 30s, late in my 30s,
mm,
and now coming into the 40s, halfway through them, is you also have to have a mental and emotional component too. You
mm,
can't just do the moves and you can't just drift away, right? I think too many people will do a kata and they check out.
mm.
Does that make sense? They're like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, this is what you're so used to your kata and your pattern that maybe you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to have for dinner. This is what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. Maybe you make a checklist and you go away on your island of kata. That kata
Mm,
is your island, and you can go be sailing away on a beach with somebody, right?
mm,
When really the kata should be used to check in.
mm,
How's my breathing? How am I feeling? Is my shoulder sore? Yeah, that's a little sore from you. I was swinging my heavy Indian clubs, right? And maybe
mm,
I swung it wrong, or maybe I overdid it,
mm,
or I was moving furniture today, like I was telling you, I was moving around furniture, things like that. Maybe I overdid it. So it is a place for me to think about, to look into where am I physically, where am I emotionally, and where's my mind? Is my mind aware of what's going on my body? You know,
mm.
is that a spider? Or is that a piece of dandruff? What is that?
Yeah, yeah.
So what I learned later, the last 10 or 15 years, is how to use these movement and martial practices as a check-in piece to see how you're doing, right?
Mm,
I've done certain katas, coming up in October. There are a few katas that I have done for 26 years,
mm,
and so it's wild to think about, how do I move differently in that same space? Well, what is that space? That's me. How am
mm.
I moving it in that space that is Randel? You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of what it's done for me. The Xingyi has helped me move. I like to joke because what I'm fighting these days is sitting under stress, and so the dynamic movement of the Xingyi for the spine is very active and moving properly,
Mm,
and Xingyi and also the Bagua. And another thing too is, less I kind of have that squirrel mind that does this, and so
yeah.
the Bagua and the Xingyi, to do it properly, you're juggling 10 or 15 different things. You're going along a checklist, and it's very hard to get into that proper stance and still do the circle walking and be fully stretched out while you're
Mm,
doing that bagua. So it keeps my mind at play on good physical qualities that I need to
mm.
do to execute these systems correctly, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
So yeah,
So why Kung Fu, not something else? So
it was there.
I can't pinpoint why. So I tried many different arts. I fell out
Mhm.
with karate, went to MMA, but it kind of always takes me back to karate. And I cannot pinpoint what is so attractive in karate that my heart is always coming back to it. You gotta have kung fu, except because it's there.
Well, it sounds a little lame. I grew up in a small mountain town in the mountains of Colorado, and there was nothing there. There was nothing. There wasn't even Taekwondo,
All right.
And so I had a good friend of mine growing up, and he would come down once a month, and he would train with a Taekwondo group, and he would train with an Ed Parker Kempo group,
Uh-huh.
and he would train for 2 days. He'd stay with some friends, and he'd get all this material, and then he would come back, and I got to be the punching bag. Right? He's like, let me try this out on here. Let me try this out on, and I got to try some out on him too. So I had my little taste of a little bit of Taekwondo and a little bit of karate, and I was never good at it. Never good at it.
Mm.
I was a better punching bag than anything. And then I did wrestling in high school. Wasn't very good at it. I wound up being better at wrestling in college after taking a break away from it. I think my nervous system's like, yeah, you know how to do this. It's been a while, but you know how to do this. So back to wrestling. That's why I took up to judo. But I think one reason that the Wing Chun, because that was my first Kung Fu system. It was so attractive to me. I had never been good at a striking art and a kicking art, and I wanted to be good at one. But two, something that's it was ambidextrous. You had to use both sides of your body. And that was very challenging. You couldn't be just right side dominant. You couldn't be left side dominant. You had to be both equal, not just with the hands, but with the legs as well. And so that was fascinating for me. There was a level, now looking at it, through a Xingyi or a Bagua lens, it might not be as complex, which doesn't mean it's any less good, but it's just not as complex as I thought it was at the time. But from coming from nothing and then coming from just sampling Taekwondo and just sampling the Ed Parker Kempo, the complexity of these little tiny movements, I could feel it. To me, coming as a newbie, and I was a Western weightlifter, bench press, squat, deadlift. It's very linear, up and down, forward and backwards.
Yeah.
Wing Chun had that, but it was up, down, forward, and backwards on an elliptical. Or you had some of Wing Chun's paired timing. I'd never seen anything like that. And not just paired timing, that's the same direction, but we also have a paired timing where there's a push and a pull, and they should land simultaneous. That was really complex to me. And so I wanted to go down that road and see how far it could take me. And so, the head of the math department at Mesa, my college, my freshman year, was teaching it. The class was free. And it's hard to beat that price.
Yeah,
that's right. That's
boxes,
right.
Yeah,
it just happened to be there. Yeah.
Yeah, you see, for me, when you say Denver, Colorado, I just see everywhere Anshin Karate with Joko Ninomiya because that's their headquarters.
That's so funny. I was talking to Greg and Sue. No, maybe it was somebody else. But we also have a really strong Weichi Ryu and Wado Ryu group too. And then I'm pretty good buddies. I want to call him a friend. Maybe he calls me a good buddy or acquaintance. There's a gentleman, but actually, you know what? Do I have his book right here? Yeah. Matthew Apsicardu has this wonderful book, Tales from the Western Generation.
Okay.
And he's been over to Okinawa quite a bit. He does Okinawan Kempo. He does Kobudo. He does some of the sword stuff. But what that book's about is it's about some of the first generations coming back from Okinawa and that were training with the Okinawans in the 70s and the 80s and stuff, and then brought karate, the Okinawan karate, and how the training was different than it is now. But yeah, his Okinawan Kempo is top tier. Matthew Apsicardo. He has a great website, Ikigawa. I don't know if you're familiar with the Ikigawa.
I think I've seen it a few times.
Yeah, but he's great. Here in Longmont, where I live, we've got a group that's been around for 37 years.
Oh,
the gentleman, I think, is from either Tokyo. I can't remember where he is, but actually, he has a Western student that's been with him for 30 years that's taken over the school, and now the Japanese gentleman is retired, but he teaches all the black belts still. And then Bennett's Karate, which is 25, 30 miles down the road, Matthew might actually be interviewing the father. The father was going over to Okinawa learning Weichiryu in the 70s. And so his son is second generation. He's American born, but he's second generation. He started Weichiryu when he was 5 years old. And they also do Kobudo. So they're very high level. So yeah, we've got is it the Ichinryu guys? We've got those guys, but there's some really beautiful high level good karate here too. We've got a group that used to be in Boulder that does Goju. Now they're in Westminster. But that's about all I remember. We've got some pretty good Aikido. And then there is a gentleman that lives in the mountains that does one of the classical Koryu Ryu arts.
Okay.
And yeah, he's got a whole dojo on the second floor of his home. And yeah, he has people from all over the world. As a matter of fact, the number one lineage holder in Japan actually retired and gave him the lineage holder authority. So I'll have to send you some of his links because he's got some really cool stuff. But yeah, there's some great Japanese arts. There's some good Kung Fu. There's great MMA here in our state. So yeah, we've got some cool stuff in the world of martial arts that's going on in Colorado.
So changing the subject a little bit, what did make you to get into the podcasting? For me, it was a accident. I was actually doing a video interview with Andy Allen from Applied Shotokan, and I managed to record half of his face. So it was like, what we do now? Okay, let's put it as a voice. So, by accident, end up doing the podcast. But what was the story for you?
So it went from the buses to my co-hosts, and I'll explain that a little bit. So when COVID hit, it was very Twilight Zone or very Outer Limits, very strange. I had a route that, the buses are only supposed to hold about 60 or 70 people. And, you have a white line that you have to stand behind. Well, this one route once a day, we called it a school tripper and a business tripper. And I would pack 80 people in the bus. I'm like, I don't care. I'm not leaving anybody behind. So everyone would be standing, stacked. It was full bus. Everyone was very courteous. A lot of people talked. Everyone had a good time on that trip. In the winter, I kept that bus cool, or warm. In the summer, I kept it cool, right? So I had this route for a few different bid lines. Well, when COVID hit and all the restrictions hit, that same 8-hour shift where one route I had 80 people, I had one person in an 8-hour shift. And so it got really strange really quick. And so 3 weeks later, our summer bid line. So we changed the schedule 3 times a year, summer, spring, and fall. So 3 weeks later after COVID, the summer had hit. And I was like, well, I'm going to be the LX. What the LX bus does, Les, is you get paid to read and you get paid to listen to podcasts. So I have a bus. I go park it under a shade tree, and then I have a radio. And let's say a bus gets into an accident. They would tell me what route and what direction. And so I would haul butt, go pick up those people, and then I would drive them until that other bus was cleared.
Or like replacement service, right?
Yeah, the replacement service. I would either drive the route, or if their bus broke down and it wasn't an accident, I would give them my bus and I would wait with the broken bus until the mechanics came. So that's what I did all summer. And so summer of 2020, I started listening to podcasts, really loving it. I found my friend Sifu Alex Richter, who is the Kung Fu genius out of New York. He had a podcast at the time called The Dudes of Kung Fu. And God rest his soul, Alex, Big Sean Madigan, his co-host, wound up passing away a couple of years later. And so Alex had to come back to podcasting later. But anyway, different story. But I started listening to podcasts, started reading a lot of books. I would train in the bus, which was great. I got paid to train. Who doesn't love that? And but my Owen, my Shingi and Bagua teacher, we would have private lessons, or I would take him to lunch. And we always had these really great conversations. And the way that Owen and I teach is more like a coach, more like a problem solver. And even though I didn't do Xingyi, he's like, what do you think about this, this, and this? And I'm like, I like all of that. Have you thought about this, this, and this? And so we would support each other, as coaches. Because even though he was my teacher in Xingyi and Bagua, and he didn't do Wing Chun, so he's like, I know that it's a different system, but you have a modern viewpoint on how you look at your classical martial art. And so we would sit and have these discussions. And Owen is very introverted, and I am very extroverted. I love talking to people. I talk to anybody about anything. And Owen's like, I would never feel comfortable doing this alone, but I'm always loving to talk about something I'm passionate about, but only with somebody that I'm comfortable with. So what would you think about doing a podcast? I'm like, yeah, sure, let's try it. So the first year, Les, and the volume, the sound, excuse me, we were still figuring out the sound. So the sound, the first 19 episodes, it's so sad.
I know the feeling.
But the thing was, it gave Owen and I a platform to talk about how we train, what we're training, and what's going on. So that was the first, and which is crazy to think because September will be 3 years that we've had the show out. So that was the first year. The second year, once we figured out all the audio, we had always wanted to interview people. And it was really cool because we got to talk to people. We both grew up. I would come down the mountain. I'd buy a couple episodes of Inside Kung Fu magazine, the Tai Chi magazine, Black Belt magazine. I'd go home and I'd read those, and, oh, this person's kind of cool. I'd love to talk to them. This person's kind of cool. I'd love to talk to them. And so sure enough, I want to say it was a year ago, we started interviewing people and in the Kung Fu world, and it's just kind of gone from there. So it just, our audience grew from the first year we had, and I've never advertised. The first year Kung Fu Conversations had 6,000 listens. The second year we had 25,000 listens, which is a big jump. Again, I've never advertised. And then we had an episode drop at the beginning of this year, and the YouTube episode has almost 4,400 listens, 4,300 listens. So that's one episode. So, and not all of them are like that. That one was just kind of a fluke, and we love that fluke. But everything we're doing is organic. We're going to have a few episodes coming out this year that are not Kung Fu related. So it'll be interesting to see how people respond to that. But it'll be around the world of Chinese culture, or it might be in the world of Chinese cinematography, like Kung Fu movies. There might be somebody that we have an interview with soon, hopefully, that fills in that gap. So, we're kind of doing some different things, but that's kind of how the show, it started from me loving listening to podcasts and talking to Owen. I'm like, oh, I was listening to this guy and he was saying this, and this person was saying that, this guy was saying this. I really like this. And he's like, maybe we should do a podcast. And so it was just a couple buddies that like to teach and like to train. And that's how the podcast came about.
I'm glad you did, because it's very interesting. I do listen to you guys. Maybe not religiously, but I do put them on. Let's see what's happening in that part of the martial arts.
Well, our last two that we did that weren't interviews, I think people might like. They're a part one and a part two. And the part one and a part two, the last two that we dropped, that's just Owen and I, is Do We Need Forms?
Yep. I was just listening to the second one yesterday. I haven't finished it yet, so don't tell me what's going to happen.
Okay. I turned into a rabbit. Gotta spoil it a little bit.
Yeah, but that's okay. So most of your plans are into interviewing people. How do you I found from my podcast that actually reaching out to people, it's easier than I thought it's gonna be. I always, when I send
Absolutely.
a message to somebody, it's like, oh, what's gonna happen if he says no? But 90% of people going like, yeah, let's go. When? And really high profile, like you said, high profile people are so willing to go and share their knowledge and chat to you. It's kind of took me by surprise.
Very much so. And knock on wood, we've had the same response with lots of yeses. If there is a no, it's not right now. Right now, I'm super busy. Can you contact me in a year? And I understand that because, again, Owen works 9 to 5. I don't really work 9 to 5. The bus hours that I do with my schedule, it's fluctuating, so it's very
Mm,
awkward. So, Owen really helps me out. And basically, we're stuck to 2 days. We
mm,
either do our podcasts on Friday or Sundays. And that's
mhm,
about the only time that we have time together. But a lot of people are willing to work with us. Like, I couldn't do that this month, but maybe if you
mm,
talk to me 2 or 3 months down the road. So that's kind of how we do it. And we've been very lucky, again, with getting some people that we feel are really high profile.
mhm,
Some people will listen to the show. I've been really lucky because I've had some people that I was surprised listen to the show, and they're like, "Hey,
mm,
we think you're doing a good job on this show. Keep up the good work." And so they'll write a little hello and a thank you, and I'll be like, "Oh, that's you. Oh my god, would you want
mm.
to be on the show?" And they might be like, "Yeah, sure, I'll be on your show." So I'm like, "Holy cow! How did that? How did that happen?" So yeah, that's been a little bit of what's happened so far. One of the big people, and I think should get some more listens, is we talked to Douglas Wong. And Douglas Wong and his teacher, Ark Y. Wong, were some of the guys that were on the original Kung Fu series with David Carradine.
Mm,
And so, and then he grew up, training with like Ao Leong, who was one of the major villains in the 80s movies, in the American 80s movies. If
wow.
you remember the great movie Big Trouble in Little China, I love that
Yep,
movie.
yep. Yeah, yeah.
He was
Great
the
stuff.
red turb. He was the guy with the goatee and the knives on the bad guy side.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, him and Douglas
Yeah.
Wong grew up training together and things like that. So, I found you guys. I just got done. It was funny because the week that I was interviewed by Sue and Greg, that
Mm-hmm,
previous Sunday, I was interviewed by, and it's a great podcast, by the way. I'll drop these guys' names too. It's
mm-hmm.
called the Martial Arts Mania Podcast. Um,
Okay.
so these two guys, they're these great cinephiles. They watch movies,
Mm-hmm,
mainly like martial arts movies. It could be 80s action. It could be a kung fu movie. It could be a classical movie. And AJ and Gavin, AJ actually teaches a a film class at a college. And so
cool.
these guys are really educated when it comes to these. Some of them could be B movies, some of them it could be blockbuster movies, but they're going to tell you about these movies that we all grew up with watching and loving and give you
Mm,
so much information on them, Les. But I was honored because I was on their podcast talking about Big Trouble in Little China, which is one of my
mm.
favorite movies. And so, yeah, it's been wild. The world of podcasting has been a roller coaster, and I think it's been a blessing too. My friends and I that went to college together, we had a radio show for 3 years, and I
Mm.
missed radio, and so this is a little bit like classical radio to me, and we get to meet each other and say hello and see how we're training and what we can learn from each other. I don't know. The podcasting world has kind of been a breath of fresh air in the last 3 years for me, so I feel very lucky to be a part of it.
Cool. I feel the same. I started to really enjoying it. I always hated my voice. I hated the way I speak because I used to use a lot of and now, big
I
thanks
get
to
you
the
there.
podcast, I'm improving all those areas. And actually, I started to liking my voice to the degree that I'm reading my book into an audiobook,
That's
recording all
fantastic.
myself. So hopefully that's gonna be project in a couple of months. Um,
I think that's gonna be. You know what? You're gonna be like. Are you familiar with Ian Fleming?
yep. Yeah.
So when I was growing up, my dad, some of the tapes that he got me before I went off to college, it was Ian Fleming reading his James Bond books, and so
Cool.
it's always interesting to hear the author's voice reading
Mm.
their work because it is a personal relationship, and
Yeah,
so I think yeah.
that's what I've found. So it was quite funny. I put the auditions through the Audible, the ACX thing, and I said, oh, I want a British. I couldn't find first Polish British with a Polish accent like mine, but I put it there, and it's like I wanted a man with a British accent, and I got the American woman from like a erotic genre. So it's like it's completely
Oh my
not what I
goodness.
want to.
That's no, I love it. I love it. You should have both. You should have you, and then that could be like if for extras on the Patreon, you get the exotic woman one too. I'm
Yeah.
sure somebody would bite.
But the most of the people who I talked to said that the best way would be actually reading my book myself because it gives the character. So I thought, well,
Mhm.
I have nothing to lose. If I don't like it, I won't publish it. If I like it, I keep doing it. But I'm finding it is a great exercise for me to speak more clear and with more kind of a proper grammar and punctuation and stuff like that. So as a self-improvement tool, it's good and the podcast is doing a good job with it as well. And I've got starting to get feedback from people that I'm more natural now instead of being a tensed, woody person.
That's fantastic. I was so excited to be on Greg and Sue's podcast
Mm.
that if you go back and listen to my interview, I say the word fascinating about 78 times because I was I was like a little, like a little lapdog. I was so excited to be there talking to them because I think that, a lot like yourself, they're so wonderful.
Mm,
And it was weird because, again, I found that podcast looking for something else,
mm,
and I found, and from them I found you and Jamie Club. You
mm.
know, I got to get one of your books too, but I found this young man who I'm hoping to have on the show. Little,
Oh,
little tiny, little
Tommy is
tiny
superb.
Tommy, little
Tommy,
Tommy.
Tommy is superb. Tommy now is my top episode. I had him twice. We do a lot of seminars together. He's so funny. It's like when we do seminar, it's just like there's nothing. I can't come after him because I won't beat his humor and the way he teaches. And he's a really cool guy, really.
Mm.
And I'm sure he's gonna be very happy to join you on the
I'm
podcast.
looking forward to having him.
Mm.
Some of the other people, I'll drop some names that you should totally take a look at. My friend, it's another Matthew. I got so many Matthews. Matthew Kruger out of Alaska.
Okay.
Matthew has a very interesting story, Les.
Mm.
He started with Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. He lives in Anchorage.
Mm.
And then he found another Brazilian Jiu Jitsu instructor, excuse me, who did Wing Chun.
Mm.
He's like, yeah, I'll try some of the Wing Chun. He liked it. And then he's like, I want to see what other martial arts are out there. So he started doing some Kobudo. He started doing
Mm.
Taekwondo. He started karate, judo, Chen Tai Chi, Xingyi, Bagua. He just started finding as much stuff as he could and training it. And then
Mm.
about 4 years later, he's like, I don't have a core. I
Mm.
don't have something that I can build as a foundation. He's like, I've just got all this stuff swimming around. I don't have a foundation. What is that? And he was smart enough to figure that out. But in the meantime, Matthew also had read a ton of like old samurai texts and
Mm.
treatises about warfare and combat, Chinese philosophy, ancient philosophies, right? About warfare, combat, life, all these other things. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to go back to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So he went back to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and about 5 or 6, 5 years into it, he's like, now I can branch out. So he
Mm.
picked up Japanese Iaido.
Mm.
And then one of the guests that I've had on my show is a Shuai Jiao practitioner. Shuai Jiao is kind of like judo. It's a Chinese version of it, but
Mm.
they might kick you and break you on the way down as they're throwing you. But my friend Sonny Mannon had lived in China for a decade just to learn Shuai Jiao, and he
Mm.
has a brilliant online course. And so Matthew's like, you know what? He's like, I've got the ground game, but I'd like some of the standing grappling too. So he started doing Sonny's course. And so he does all of that. He does the Iaido, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu still, and he does the Shuai Jiao.
Mm.
But he was sitting around on the mat one day, and I think this is at the time he was a purple belt, something like that. And he's with a purple belt or brown belt, and they're talking about adding ethics and morals into
Mm.
their training and their teaching. And one of the guys is like, yeah, nobody's ever done this in the world before. And Matthew's like, hold on. No. They were doing this forever. and here is some texts. Here's this, here's that. So what he does is he takes these old samurai treatises and shows how they can be applicable to our modern mindset.
Oh, very cool.
And that show is called Walking with the Tengu, Tengu. You know, the Japanese Birdman demon that apparently gave some people their martial arts. Walking with the Tengu with Matthew Kruger. And he just put out his first book on Lulu, and it's pocket training. Mine's in my car. I wish I had it. But it's a small little book, and it's got like a daily meditation. And then it's got, he calls it covert training or obvious training. So if you're in public, maybe you can roll your wrists around and people won't think you look weird, and you can open up a joint for 5 or 6 minutes. Or, you know, if you're somewhere where you're not going to bother anybody, he's like, if you don't have time to do full training here, do these weird Japanese sumo squats, you know, or do this or do that. So it's just very cool. But Matthew Kruger's podcast, Walking with the Tengu, is excellent. I'm going to have him on pretty soon with the Warriorship Conversing project. My friend Dean Suter over in New Zealand, he has the Musha Shugyo podcast, which is about the Warrior's Way. I think he's great. I'm hoping to have him on the show. I'm hoping to have everybody on the show. I'd love to get you on. Maybe you, Greg, and Sue, and do like a round table, or maybe you, Greg, Sue, and Ken. You know, like with a lot of people. And I think with a lot of people, I've already got an idea on that. I really want to have 1, 2, or 3 questions, because I think if we left it open forum, nobody would get anywhere with it. But if we had it down to 1 or 2 questions, and then saw everybody's cup of tea on how they do those things. But I've met so many good people. A guest that you have to check out, I'll send you some of his stuff. Kevin Secours. Are you familiar with Coach Kevin Secours?
No.
He has the integrated fighting system. So he's out of Canada, and Coach Kevin has done everything. When I mean everything, he's done everything. And
I think you mentioned him on the karate conversation on karate.
Yeah. I sent them stuff. So do you know the Splinter Cell video games?
Yeah.
There was one of them that he was the guy in the suit that did all the stuff. And his last 2 books, I think, would very much fit. I think Jamie would have a great conversation with Coach Kevin, because they've kind of got that similar mindset. But Jamie's last book, I think, was on When Parents Aren't Around. Was that his book? Yeah.
That's
so it. Coach Kevin's last 2 books, one of them's called Safe School, and then the other one is called The Tactical Teen. And he just put those 2 out this year. And he's a father, and he works anything from kids to teachers to special forces to SWAT teams to soldiers and anybody in between. And so he has a really good way of dialing it up or down to his audience. And so I really like that, because I think sometimes maybe it's not what you know, but it's the mindset. And that changes how we apply all those things. So yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of rambling now, but I feel super blessed to, you know, kind of be doing this and get to talk to people, and I'm interested in all this stuff.
You mentioned a few times Ken. I'm really, really excited because Ken is going to be my guest in June. He's coming here for a week, so we're going to be training together. Hopefully, I'm going to steal some his knowledge about the cinematography and taking pictures, so I never end up with the lights like you can see now, that I'm blending with my background and you can't see my face properly. So I'm hoping that he's going to give me some tips and hacks so I can do it properly instead of improvising all the time.
Well, you look great on this end, if that helps out anything.
Thank you. Listen, Randel, give us all the details, where to find you, promote yourself, promote the podcast, whatever you need to do.
Sure. So my solo project is called Red Forest Chinese Boxing. Red like the color, forest like the trees, Chinese like the delicious food, and boxing like Joe Louis. And you can find me on Instagram, YouTube. I got a small page. You can find me on the Facebook pages and things like that. And I mainly do Wing Chun. That's the one thing I feel like I might be sort of qualified enough to teach after 26 years. And then our show, Owen and myself, Kung Fu Conversations, you can find us here on Instagram. You can find YouTube. We've got a YouTube page. We're on all the stuff, Spotify, Apple Cast, things like that. And then I run the Instagram page, and we also have a Facebook page for Kung Fu Conversations. And we're dropping a new episode this Friday, part 1.
And I highly recommend to listen. I am listening, and you should too. Thank you, Randel. It was a pleasure to have you.
Les, it's been a blessing. Have a blessed day, my friend. Got to get back to it, my friend.
Well done for listening to all of it. You are a superhero. Thank you very much for your support. And if you could leave us that review on a podcast platform, that would be amazing. I appreciate your time, appreciate your support, and I wish you all the best until the next one.